We're going to have a gentleman, and again, you can read all about what he's done. He has a couple of TED Talks out there as well you may want to check out. But what I was saying about Derek is every time I have a chance, and he was introduced to me 3 years, we were introduced 3 years ago, and every time I've had a chance to be in the room with him, I learned something. From my perspective, the ultimate compliment for an educator. Every time you're in the room with an educator, you want to learn something. And he is that good. He's helped us think about the work in ways that I had never thought about it, and others hadn't thought about it. But he's helping other districts do so. I've had other superintendents say to me that the work of Lark and Derek Cabrera is helping them transform their school districts. So we have extended time with Derek today, and Jim, and I know you're going to be inspired by their words and their thinking. And with that, I'll welcome Mr. Derek Cabrera, Dr. Derek Cabrera to the stage. Thank you, Derek.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to move this. As you may have noticed, I am not Sir Ken Robinson. I'm sure you won't, I'm sorry that you won't be able to hear Sir Ken today, although you've heard him on video, but I'm sure you join me in wishing him and his family well. I was scheduled to speak after Sir Ken and was asked to take on the difficult job of speaking in his stead when we heard news of his emergency. I know how excited you were to see him, so I hope I won't be the source of utter disappointment. But in my defense, what I have to say is far more interesting than what he was going to say. What I'd like to talk about is the need for a particular type of thinker in the world called meta-thinkers, or what scientists call metacognitive thinkers. Meta-thinkers are people who have an awareness of how they think and maintain that awareness when they're thinking about anything and everything. Meta-thinking isn't a new idea. It's what Buddhists and leftists call consciousness or self-awareness. What is new is that scientists have recently discovered new things about how we can be more metacognitive, how teachable and learnable it is, and the noteworthy outcomes that can result. Now, about this conference's theme, E3. I hope you leave today having learned that E3 is more than a catchy logo or a memorable catchphrase for this conference. E3 is a deep and meaningful construct that is the basis for revolutionary changes in education, most notably the purposeful development of meta-thinking from student to superintendent. But first, why do we need meta-thinkers? You may have heard that Einstein said we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. That's really the epitome of meta-thinking, because most of the problems we face in our lives or globally in the world are problems of our own thinking. We created them with a particular mindset, and to solve them, we'll need to unseat that mindset and entertain a new one. A hard truth we must face is that our biggest problems result from a mismatch between the way the world works and how we think. Let's take a look at how we get ourselves into trouble when we don't do enough meta-thinking with a few examples. Here's a recipe for disaster near you, brought to you by the lack of meta-thinking. Ultra-smart, entitled, amoral Wall Street traders with little care or consciousness of the global effects of their selfish actions, an utter disregard for others, and a gift for self-indulgent justification, find a loophole in the law and drive a truck through it. Unconscious but otherwise upstanding citizens with just the right amount of gullibility convince themselves that too good to be true might just be true, and take loans that far outpace their earnings. Foreclosures are rampant, markets crash, recessions ensue, and Iceland goes bankrupt. Political leaders motivated by fear and favoritism concoct an idea that some banks are simply just too big to fail, and then double down by failing to prosecute the individuals behind the banks, instead giving them the job of fixing the problem they created. Here's another disaster that's already in production, and we're all a part of it. Martin Glaser, the author of Missing Microbes, explains that antibiotic use is rising in astronomical proportions, especially in children. In particular, parents who do not question their own assumptions and who dearly want to protect their children are giving antibiotics at a rate of 1,000 courses per 1,300 babies a year. An average, children receive 17 doses of antibiotics before they're just 20 years old. The downstream effects of this behavior are extremely dangerous because the bacteria these young people are carrying become resistant to antibiotics. Glaser says, a cold becomes an untreatable pneumonia, a knee injury becomes MRSA, and people die. According to the CDC, the #1 health threat to us this year is antibiotic resistance and coping with untreatable infections affecting 2 million people in this year in the US alone. And of course, there are other countless classic examples of the lack of meta-thinking that never get old. This one is about a solution that led to big problems literally downstream. Pests were killing crops and decreasing production yields in industrial farms across America. The solution is to employ pesticide sprays that include nitrates as the active ingredient. Hundreds of millions of tons of nitrates seeped into the groundwater and then into streams, river basins, and eventually into the Mississippi, making its way down to the Delta, where the nitrates interact with the sun to create a toxic dead zone in one of the world's largest shrimp and crab fisheries. This caused shrimpers to take their boats out farther to sea to find the catch that they used to find on shore. This required more boat fuel, which had gone up in price due to the consequences of a war in the Gulf. The cost of dinner at Red Lobster just got more expensive. Meanwhile, bees, who pollinate plants and increase crop yields, are now dying off in droves, likely to because of the pesticides that were designed to increase crop yields. The next example is a little bit closer to home. I was in Dick's Sporting Goods the other day and saw a mother and a boy around 8 years old waiting in the line at the checkout counter. At the end of the counter was a beverage fridge designed to manipulate the less metacognitive shoppers to buy a refreshing drink while they waited in line. The overweight boy begged his mother for a Pepsi, and I could see the mom think, and then explain to the boy that it was early and that the Pepsi was full of sugar and chemicals. The boy was saddened that he couldn't have what PepsiCo and Dick's wanted him to want. Then the boy came up with an alternative based on his mother's concerns. He said, "Okay, can I have a Gatorade?" To which his mother said yes. Gatorade is only a fraction healthier than Pepsi, and there was water in the same cooler, bottled of course. Metacognition isn't just for individuals. Organizations can use metacognition too. Because if you think about it, if this child becomes obese over his lifetime, the amount of sports equipment he needs will decline proportionally. And Dick's might have just sold themselves out of a customer for life by not thinking it through. The need for metacognitive awareness is as pedestrian as it gets. Our everyday lives, and in particular the lives of our children, involve navigating a gauntlet of manipulative tactics from social media, advertising, and product campaigns. The only inoculation against this series of manipulations is metacognition. Look at the many manipulations you will find at your local supermarket, all designed to influence your choices and maximize profits. There's the right side entry of the store to encourage more spending through counterclockwise shopping, researched and approved. Fruits and vegetables up front to give a healthy vibe. Shelf space and end caps available to the highest bidders so that you naturally notice the most expensive items at eye level. And essential and common items like milk and eggs at the back of the store, placed there not for your convenience, but designed to manipulate you to buy more than what you came to buy. Who knew that a harmless errand to the grocery store could be so full of manipulations, swindlers, and schemers? But our kids won't be inoculated against these swindlers. They won't learn to think for themselves, and they won't be empowered to solve our most pressing problems if we spend most of our time knowing in front of them instead of getting them to build knowledge in front of us. If we spend our time telling them what to think instead of teaching them how to think. If we spend our time teaching subjects and not enough time teaching humans. And if we spend too much time preparing them to do well in school and on tests and not enough time developing the whole person through thinking and preparing them for life. And here's why. That, a very small number, is the number of top 10 jobs in the year 2013 that existed just 6 years earlier in 2007. We are arming our children with knowledge that's already out of date to get a future job that doesn't exist today, use technology that hasn't yet been invented, and solve unpredictable problems in a world we can only imagine. We cannot predict where life's journey will take our children. But if we prepare them to think, they will thrive. So the question is, how do we teach meta-thinking? I'll tell you, in the 10 years of working in the trenches with teachers in schools, preceded by 15 years of working in the trenches as an educator myself, I can honestly say that I've never met anyone who disagrees that it would be nice to have a society full of thinking people, and that schools, in concert with families and communities, are the place to make it so. And while everyone agrees that we should teach thinking, there are a lot of people who don't know how to teach thinking. There are also some others who have strange ideas about how to do it. The most popular of this latter bunch is the Let's Teach a Critical Thinking Course sophomore year crowd. Of course, that's too late and too short. Thinking isn't something we teach once or twice and hope they get it. Thinking is something we do in order to make meaning. Yet I've also met a lot of people who believe or hope or pray that thinking will just occur as a byproduct of teaching subject matter. Of course, it doesn't, any more than through knowledge of the thorough knowledge of the Battle of Saratoga will occur as a byproduct of not teaching it explicitly. Funny story. I was in a classroom not too long ago, and a little boy in the 5th grade said to his teacher, he raised his hand, he said, "Miss Thompson, you keep asking me to think about it. And I have no idea what you mean by that. What do you want me to do?" This little boy's question sums up the problem. We're not explicit about what it means to think. We behave as if it just happens, and that kids just do it. And the result is that a lot of kids think of their brain in much the same way that they think of their heart, an organ. It has a job to do, and it does it. No intervention necessary. When we teach them that their mind is something that could be self-directed and understood, it's often an epiphany for them. We also act as if there is some optimal time to get kids learning how to think. In truth, it's always an opportune time developmentally for the child. It starts when they're born, and it ends never. We focus much on the K-12 process on teaching kids what to think, and we need also to spend time teaching kids how to think. And we can teach how to think through what they're learning. Not in addition to the content, but as a way to get deep understanding of the subject matter that they're learning. What we must do is use the subject matter we're teaching as a guide, as a medium for teaching thinking. So, we are teaching thinking all the time, through the subject matter, not separate from it. This approach will foster a deep understanding of both what kids need to learn and the process of how they learn. The truth is that we know exactly how to teach kids to be metacognitive. All we need is the will to do so. We know that the human mind uses just 4 patterns of thinking to transform lifeless information into meaningful knowledge. These 4 patterns of thinking are already occurring in every moment in our classrooms, and all we need to do is point out that they're happening, so we can make the thinking that is going on explicit. These are the 4 patterns of thinking that combine together at lightning speed in the human mind to transform information about any topic or subject into meaning. Making these patterns known to your students helps them to slow down their mind and watch it as if it were in slow motion. We make distinctions between things and other things by creating a boundary between identity and other. We systematize things into groups or sorts or categories by putting parts and wholes together. We make action-reaction relationships between and among ideas and systems of ideas. And we take perspectives on things, establishing both a point and a view. We make distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives, or what a lot of people call DSRP, not as separate acts, but as integral. One cannot occur without the others, and they are simultaneously occurring. Here are a few examples that capture these 4 patterns of meta-thinking. You'll all recognize the I'm a Mac commercials. The gist of this fun and effective campaign is to make a distinction between the aesthetically beautiful, simple-to-use Mac and the stodgy, out-of-date PC. Making distinctions are a universal thing that's happening throughout the day in our classrooms. Distinguishing between PC and Mac is no different than distinguishing between the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, between mathematical expressions and equations, or between the colors of the rainbow. Becoming aware that we're making distinctions makes us conscious of how we draw or define the boundaries of an idea or a system of ideas. Whenever we draw a boundary to define something, that same boundary defines what is not that thing, or the other. Any boundary we make is a distinction between 2 fundamentally important elements: the identity or the thing, and the other stuff that's not the thing. When we understand that all thoughts are comprised of distinct boundaries, we become aware that we focus on one thing at the expense of focusing on another. Distinction making allows us to simplify our thinking, but it also introduces biases that may go unchecked if you're unaware. It is distinction making that allows us to pass a cup of coffee when asked, but it's also distinction making that creates us and them, dichotomies that lead to the closed-mindedness, or worse, alienation, bullying, and violence. Distinctions are a part of every thought act and every speech act, and we do not form words without having formed distinctions first. The second pattern of metacognition that's happening all the time in your classroom is part-whole thinking. Your students constantly construct and deconstruct ideas by breaking things down into parts or creating new wholes. When a student realizes that the only difference between an expression and an equation is an equal sign, that's part-whole thinking. When a student breaks down the major issues of a historical event to better understand it, and then selects a few of these parts to present a summary of his findings, that's part-whole thinking. When a small child takes apart classroom routines to learn what it means to be a part of a community, that's part-whole thinking. It's often said that there are 2 types of thinkers: splitters and lumpers. Those who split stuff apart, and synthesizers who lump things together. We need to teach all children to become splumpers. When we become aware that our mind is always breaking things down into parts and splumping them into whole systems, we realize that any topic, subject, or situation is better understood by breaking it down or putting it back together again. Every book contains chapters containing paragraphs that contain sentences, that contain words with letters made up of ink strokes, which are comprised of pixels made up of atoms. To construct or deconstruct meaning is to organize different ideas into part-whole configurations. A change in the way the ideas are organized leads to a change of the meaning itself. Every system can become a part of some larger system. The process of thinking about things means that we must draw a distinction where we stop zooming in and when we stop zooming out. The act of thinking is defined by splitting things up or lumping ideas together, and nothing exists in isolation, but in systems of context. We can study the parts separated from the whole, or we can generalize the whole from the parts. But in order to gain understanding of any system, we must do both in the end. Of course, once we break down things into parts, we need to think about how those parts are related to each other. And that's the third pattern of meta-thinking. Relationships are often hidden. So we need to teach kids to look for them and to make them explicit. For example, when I type the phrase lobster dog into Google, the relationship is actually invisible. It's hidden in the white space between the two words. But you'd be surprised just how many people have dressed their dogs up as a lobster. Thousands and thousands of photos. This is a silly example of relationships. But remember that your kids are already making connections all the time. Your job is to help them realize that it's a powerful metacognitive skill that helps them understand things in all subjects. We cannot understand much about anything or idea or systems of things without understanding the relationships between and among them. So it's critical that students become conscious of the fact that understanding anything involves understanding its relationships. There are many important types of relationships: causal, correlative, feedback, inputs and outputs, influence, direct and indirect. And there are relationships at every level of scale, between atoms, molecules, cells, neurons, between humans and groups of humans, even between countries, and even between planets and galaxies. At the most fundamental level, though, all relationships require that we consider two underlying elements: action and reaction, or the correlating effects of two or more things. Gaining an awareness of the number of interrelationships around us forms an ecological ethos that connects us in an infinite network of interactions. Action-reaction relationships are not merely important to the understanding of physical systems, but are essential metacognitive trait for understanding human social systems and the essential interplay between the three parts of the mind: our thoughts, our feelings, and our motivations, or what scientists call cognition, emotion, and conation. The other day, I was reading a news article. It turns out that turtle crime is on the rise. A few days ago, a snail was mugged by two turtles. When the police arrived, they asked the snail what happened. The snail said, "I don't know. It all happened so fast." You laugh. But did you know that in the split second it took you to see the humor in that joke, you unconsciously took three different perspectives? You did. The joke isn't funny unless you distinguish between a human concept of speed, a turtle's concept of speed, and a snail's concept of speed. So everything your students think about history, about math, English, art, music, sports, themselves and their friends is framed by perspectives. When we make distinctions, when we group or sort things into part-whole structures, or when we draw relationships between ideas, we are always doing so from a particular perspective. So becoming aware of perspectives makes us more metacognitive and conscious of what our minds are thinking. Sometimes these perspectives are so basic and so unconscious, we don't even see them, like in the joke I just told. But they're always there. If we think about perspectives in a fundamental way, we can see that they're made up of two relating elements: a point from which we are viewing, and the thing or systems of things in the view. That's why perspectives are synonymous with a point of view. Awareness of the value of taking perspective and being aware of the perspectives one takes, and equally important, the ones that we don't take, is paramount in deeply understanding oneself and the world around us. There is a saying that if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. When we shift perspective, we also transform the distinctions, the relationships, and the systems that we see and do not see. These four metacognitive skills might seem pretty simple, but when students learn them, they become aware of how they think. It's as if they are being introduced to their minds for the very first time, and a number of remarkable outcomes occur. They don't just learn the four skills, they actually develop skill sets in 8 other areas. They'll become creative thinkers who are inventive and insightful and imaginative, able to create new ideas, innovations, inventions, and energy. They'll become critical thinkers who think analytically, identify biases, and see flaws in logic, and ask intelligent questions to seek deeper understanding. They'll become emotionally intelligent, people who are aware of their mental models, their emotions, and their motivations, have empathy and compassion for self and others, and possess grit, perseverance, and tenacity in pursuit. They'll also become pro-social thinkers who recognize themselves as citizens of a larger community by considering others and developing effective communication and deep listening skills. They develop academically into successful students by becoming knowledge-able through building ideas rather than memorizing facts and becoming simply information-full. They become actually design thinkers. What this means is that they can build things or ideas or processes based on their essential form and function and develop the most appropriate solution under existing constraints. And they become scientific thinkers who can think independently, acknowledge their biases, be open-minded, and seek evidence to support their theories about reality. And finally, they become systems thinkers who see the wider context of a situation to avoid unintended outcomes and consequences. All of these forms of thinking, which we all want for our children, are the outcomes of teaching the 4 patterns of meta-thinking, and they are the essence of what it means to develop the whole child, or to teach humans, not subjects. Meta-thinking alone can transform your school or district if you follow what successful districts have discovered through their implementation. Let me share a few of those insights from the districts and schools we've had the delight to work with over the last decade. I'll tell you a little story. 10 years ago, Laura and I were concerned that our Ivy League students could do school but lacked basic meta-thinking skills like problem solving, creativity, emotional intelligence, and grit. We decided to take our research on metacognition out of the tower and into the trenches. We started doing talks around the country to anyone who would listen, and those talks really hit a nerve. Our concern about our students was shared among businesses, educational and political leaders, and parents, teachers, and students. Energized by this overwhelming response, we embarked on an audacious vision and mission to engage, educate, and empower 7 billion thinkers. Our vision mission was for our research lab to keep us focused and on track, and on a daily basis to build the culture of our lab. But a year later, a principal named Christina Dickens from Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia approached me, and she had a kind of a novel request. She said, "Can we adopt your vision mission?" Chris wanted to use our lab's vision mission and culture building strategies for her entire school, to train her teachers and to transform her school into what she called a think school. I said sure, without realizing that this would lead to an E3 thinking revolution in education. Today, districts, schools, and teachers across the United States are adopting our vision mission as their own. Like Chris's school is committed to engaging, educating, and empowering the thinkers the world needs, many other districts, principals, and individual teachers have taken responsibility for developing thinkers in their community with significant qualitative and quantitative results. In 2012, ICSD began training teachers to develop meta-thinking skills in students across the district, and Dr. Brown and the ICSD board adopted our vision mission to engage, educate, and empower 6,000 thinkers. Since then, the graduation rate has climbed to 90% from 78%, and students were above state and national averages on standardized test scores. The qualitative effects on students and teachers are even more pronounced. So there are districts all over the country, ranging from 250,000 students and teachers to 600 thinkers as their vision, all of which are helping to engage, educate, and empower thinkers. And there are tens of thousands of independent teachers who have also counted themselves and their students into this vision mission. From 1 to 100 thinkers, it all starts to add up. And today, I'm happy to say that we have reached close to 1 million thinkers and counting, which is a long way from 7 billion, so we have a lot of work to do. So there is a universal vision and mission that resonates for any district or school or teacher. What Chris Dickens did, and what many other districts today are doing, including right here at ICSD, is to adopt this vision and mission. The vision keeps your district focused on what matters and transforming students into meta thinkers. The mission tells each person in the organization the simple things that need to be done every day in every student interaction over and over again to accomplish the vision. Our most successful district leaders enculturate their vision mission throughout so that everything that goes on in the district is focused and aligned to vision and mission. That means that the district initiatives are all framed by the vision and mission and that everyone in the district is on the same page. Let me give you a few examples of how ICSD here and others have done it. They're working hard to ensure that their 4 cultural initiatives are completely aligned with vision mission for developing thinkers. They have 4 cultural initiatives, and each of them is getting in alignment. The first initiative is that metrics that matter. To change a district for the better, we need to think of tests and grades as the low bar, and deep understanding, transfer, and metacognition and whole person development as the high bar. The second initiative is a professional learning network, or PLN, that establishes a community of leadership, staff, teachers, parents, and community members and students to learn more about the district's audacious vision and mission and cultural initiatives, and to learn and share best practices, methods, techniques, technologies that make it possible, including things like this conference and other trainings and things like that. The third initiative involves curriculum design. The curriculum design process, learning modules, and daily lessons must reflect a commitment to the district's vision and mission. Districts have worked to align curriculum and learning experiences that transform students into well-rounded thinking citizens. And that all starts with what they teach and how they teach it. And the fourth initiative is kind of a think culture campaign, which is making thinking the topic of discussion across the district, including students and teachers and community, in the same way that we used to see posters that said reading is fundamental, or campaigns. Successful districts have launched think campaigns to remind everyone that thinking is fundamental to what they're doing. Culture is the most powerful leverage for change available to any organization. Many leaders and leadership training programs get this wrong, thinking that top-down strategic planning is what matters most. But while it takes a little longer to build, it lasts a lifetime and is built from the ground up, not top down. Culture can be built purposefully because culture is simply the sharing of mental models. The primary thing that a culture must share is the same vision and mission. And leaders that have had success understood that the vision and the mission are not statements in a frame on the wall, but must be shared mental models in the hearts and minds of everyone in the district and the community. A great example of these efforts is the Think District pages that superintendents and principals can create that help the entire community better understand and engage with the transformational change that is underway. Visitors to the page can learn about the vision and mission and the research behind meta-thinking. They can learn about major cultural initiatives the district has and how they're driven by the vision and mission. And they can keep learning together as a district by hearing about what we call wow stories, all of which are getting at, seeing things in the classrooms that are happening and then showing them to everybody in the district so that we can sort of collectively learn from each other. All of these resources and teachers for students and parents and board members and community members need to spread the word and build the culture and alignment across the organization. And there's near total transparency, which has a lot of benefits. Similarly, teachers are creating their own Think Classroom pages where they get to claim their part of the vision. You can see Mrs. Smith's classroom has 120 thinkers that she's responsible for. And they have separate cultural initiatives in their classroom with students, parents, and colleagues. The effect is that while everyone is aligned across the district, they are also laser focused on what they need to do in their little part of the pond. So these principles of vision, mission, and culture are readily applied in the classroom as well. Teachers are transparent with their students about the vision and mission and use 7 important culture change initiatives to transform their classroom into a think classroom. At its core, to engage means to get me thinking. It means authentic student engagement. This can be best understood by making a distinction between authentic engagement and its counterparts, strategic and ritual compliance, rebellion, and retreatism. Thinking lies at the root of authentic engagement. We know that students build knowledge by thinking or creating meaning about information, and that thinking acts upon information and causes students to build knowledge, and is also the root action of true engagement. Engagement simply means that students are thinking about the topic of the lesson. We often think that the best way to engage a student is to make it fun, but think about your own patterns of engagement. You're often most engaged when your mind is engaged, interested, and especially not bored. Sometimes it's fun, but sometimes it's not. And fun can be engaging, but thinking is always engaging. We also think that the A students are engaged and F students are not. That is not always true. I know, because I was an F student. It's not as simple as A students are engaged and F students are not. And here's why. Authentic engagement is very different than strategic compliance. Strategic or ritual compliance is a form of faux engagement, where learners are engaged in some of the extrinsic or intrinsically motivated things. For example, they may be motivated by grades or choose strategies to maximize their grade that simultaneously lessen their learning. As is often the case, it is quite possible that our top students are not authentically engaged, but are instead strategically compliant. They have learned how to do school, but are not developing a deep understanding of the topics of study. These compliance behaviors can be redirected toward authentic engagement by engaging kids through their thinking about the topic at hand. Strategically compliant students are thinking about how to game the system to get the grade, whereas authentically engaged students are thinking about their learning. Rebellion is a form of misdirected faux engagement as well. Rather than punishing or controlling rebellious behavior, we should redirect its energy towards authentic engagement. Rebellion is often seen as disengagement, but it is actually a sign of desire to engage, coupled with the need for help of how to do it. And retreatist behavior is of the greatest concern, because a student has given up or shut down or disengaged entirely. It's the opposite of engagement and should be taken seriously and requires intervention and concerted effort to connect with the student. The existence of any of these behaviors, compliance, rebellion, or retreatism, is an important feedback mechanism we must attend to because it indicates that something about the school or classroom culture is disincentivizing authentic engagement. So engagement, when we say engage, it really is synonymous with get me thinking. The second part of the mission is to educate. Again, we have to move beyond the dictionary definition and build a deeper shared common model of what it means to educate. The most frequent definition is simply to teach someone such that learning occurs. So to understand educate, we must define learning. And learning is commonly thought of as the acquisition of or change in knowledge. And as mentioned above, students build knowledge by giving meaning to information, by structuring it through the process of thinking. Sorry, I have massive ADD, and I get distracted by the There's a little noise in the audience. So note that all students are making distinctions and part-whole systems and relationships and taking multiple points of view and perspectives to build meaning of content. Our commitment to learning is exemplified by an important or fundamental question of teaching and learning. How are my learners building their ideas? Of equal importance is the recognition that learners can get information, but they cannot get knowledge. They must build it through the process of thinking. So we need to teach them how to think while they're learning information. Effective education employs multiple techniques and classroom tools that engage all of their senses, visual, tactile, kinesthetic, to engage and educate them through their thinking processes. The third and final part of the mission is to empower. To engage is to think, and to educate is to get students building and grounding ideas. To empower is simply to transfer, over time, the role of the teacher to the student. Thus, if the student has the capacity to play the role of teacher to themselves, they become a lifelong learner. The student becomes the master of their own learning. Empowerment is fundamentally metacognitive, because if the student understands how they build knowledge to make it meaningful, they can teach themselves anything. That's empowerment in a nutshell. Society needs meta-thinkers, and as educators, it's our job to create these thinkers. If we allow ourselves to get distracted by all the noise of bureaucracies and politics, if we allow ourselves to make it more complicated than it really is, then we allow ourselves to get distracted from the one thing we have control over, the moment when we get to do the best job in the world, to develop young people into whatever they can be. On the other hand, if we stay laser focused on our vision to develop young people into thinkers, and understand that 3 simple things done by many can lead to big, big changes, we will see our schools transform much faster than we ever expected. Engage, get me thinking, educate about what I'm learning, empower so that I can think for myself. Get me thinking about what I'm learning so I can think for myself. Society desperately needs us. Our students need us. Get unstuck, free yourself up, and join the revolution. Thank you and enjoy the conference. I have 2 minutes. If there's any questions.
We have the microphone down.
There's a mic or, yeah.
Good morning.
Morning.
I had the pleasure of working with you actually a number of years ago. Some of us from the staff development department came down. I have a question. Implicit in all that you presented, but not explicit, is sort of the notion of praxis, linking what we think and action.
Yes.
And I'm just curious if that's purposeful or not purposeful, and if you could explain a little bit about as to why. Because the reason I ask the question is, in my mind, empower is when we're actually taking collective action to improve the quality of our lives. So I just want to understand that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a super deep question and a really important one, and it's one that I think a lot of people, there's a lot of science behind how sort of thinking and knowledge and behavior and action are related. But I think what we know, what we're sort of starting to come to realize is that the separation between knowledge or the mental models that we create about the world and behavior is actually not as separate as maybe we used to think they were. We used to think you sort of had a mental model and then you behave. But it turns out that the behavior is simply an extension of the mental model. And so if we change the mental model, the behavior will change. And likewise, if we don't see behavior change, then the mental model hasn't changed. And so what we're learning is that those 2 things are really much more integral than we previously thought. I hope that kind of gets at what you're asking.